Sometimes you can follow every best practice and still at the end everybody ignores it, right? We thought that the employees were knowledgeable, but actually we didn't help them being knowledgeable. All of these details, what you care about is making sure that it makes sense. It's still your responsibility to make sure you're taking decisions that make sense. What is obvious for CISO isn't for them, isn't for the CEO of a company.
Hello and welcome to the
Hi.
Passwork Cybersecurity webinar. Hi Tristan, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. You?
I'm doing absolutely perfect. I'm very glad to be on this occasion with you, and of course, it's an honor to share the spotlight with you as this is our first ever webinar on Passwork. We're going to be talking about all things cybersecurity, as again, the webinar is supposed to do that. We have today Tristan Roth, the founder of ISMS Copilot and an ISO 27001 consultant. But as much as I would love to tell you all about merits of Tristan, I think he'll manage to do a lot better job on that than himself. So, Tristan, a little bit about you, how you got into the space, what do you like about it, and what makes you stay.
Yes, thank you so much, Turbo. Really a pleasure to be here. So, as you said, I'm Tristan. I'm the founder of ISMS Copilot. So, it's basically an AI assistant that helps consulting companies, especially in the compliance industry, so ISO 27001 and similar frameworks. So, what we're doing is really using AI to empower consultants. We're not too much into replacing people. I think it's just way more motivating to augment people. So that's a part of the answer to you why. Very happy to talk about the topic of today, why your employees in your cybersecurity policies. I have some experience implementing the standard ISO 27001 for information security inside the company. I wrote a lot of policies, saw different implementations, so happy to discuss this today and figuring out why people ignore policies.
Absolutely. And I couldn't be happier to hear an answer like that. But yeah, again, the topic of today's webinar is why your employees ignore cybersecurity policies. And that question is something that you ask yourself all the time because you, as our viewer, might be, part of the reason why. And we're going to explore a lot of things that are revolved around why people ignore these cybersecurity policies. We're going to be discussing five main topics today, and I think it will be great to start with, of course, the ISO 27001. But before we kind of get into the first question, I want to lay the foundation as to the reason why we're asking that question. Because, again, if we want to explore the gap between policy and practice and why many organizations, for instance, like struggle to make ISO 27001 a part of their day-to-day behavior. Because again, as I mentioned, it has become like a standard for information security management, but in practice, a lot of companies treat it like a tick box exercise. And I recently watched a survey from ISACA, I think it was that, yeah, from 2024 that found that only like 38% of the companies felt their compliance efforts had meaningfully improved their security posture. And when you really think about it, that's a very bad misalignment. And so the question rises again as to why ISO like 27001 is often seen as a compliance checkbox rather than a cultural shift. And what are the biggest challenges organizations face in truly embedding security into their culture, but beyond just documentation?
You're nailing the that's the crux of the matter. So if the question is for me right now, I can tell you what I think.
Yep, that was it. Yeah, let's start with this question.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think one of the biggest challenges that's probably the origin of why a company is going for compliance, and often is for external reasons. There is nothing wrong with that. From I mean, like just to make it clear, like when I say external reasons, often a company has a customer that is requesting ISO or SOC 2. So
Mhm.
they will go for the standard for, let's say, sales-driven reasons. And again, not a bad thing. It's just that then what happens is that maybe companies that are going for implementation of the standard have the wrong expectations. They expect it will be
Mhm.
easy. They expect it will take little time, and it's just yeah, tick of the box exercise. So doing so, what they will miss is that they have to put focus there. They have to actually care about what's inside the standard. And so that they also have to, it's like a project. So you have to implement
Mhm.
it and you have to inform your employees. You have to design consistent policies. And sometimes maybe companies are looking for shortcuts. So what they do is that they just don't think that they will have to dedicate resources to such a project. And so what happens is that, of course, then there is no embedding the security in the culture of the organization, because we just thought that it would be a topic of 1 month. Let's just sign off these papers, draft 50 documents, and we're good for it, right? And of course, in the meantime, you didn't do the deep work that was like training employees or just drafting a policy that actually makes sense for the company, right? If you don't, and this takes time. So if you want to be certified ISO 27001 in like 3 weeks, of course you didn't have the time to draft policies that made sense to your organization, right? So
Mhm.
often it's this hack mindset, or we can hack everything, we can take shortcuts for everything, and in the results, it's shallow work that cannot be embedded because there is no substance to embed in the organization. So yeah.
That actually makes a lot of sense. You would think that it'd be a lot easier because again, everyone has that compliance standard put in place, and you think, no, it's not going to take that much time, or you don't dedicate enough resources for it, and then you end up just catching up to everyone else. But that makes perfect sense, and I think that's actually a perfect segue to our next question, because I want to highlight that rules alone don't change the behavior, but culture does, and that's exactly what you mentioned. Because even when security policies, for instance, are written technically and communicated also technically, they're often ignored. And that just adds to your answer to the first question, because according to Gartner, here's something I read: over 70% of security incidents actually involve employees either somehow bypassing or misunderstanding the company policies. Again, going back to ISO 27001. And so clearly, compliance doesn't actually equal adoption. And I want to take this to our next question that I wanted to ask you is why do employees often ignore the ISO-based policies, unless they're rooted in culture?
Yeah, so I mean, important question. Even though, I mean, in the end, like, you can try your best. I'm not sure. Even sometimes you can follow every best practice, and still at the end, everybody ignores it, right? But I mean, we can still find some answers for that. I mean,
Mm.
best chances that policies aren't ignored. I think so. From what I've seen is that many organizations. So before I mentioned this shortcut mentality, and there are shortcuts in the sense of
Yeah.
things that can help you reduce the time frame from like 12 months to maybe 4 months, right? These things
Yeah.
exist, and so there are tools, there are templates. But what happens is, for example, you are an organization. You buy a set of templates for your policies. So you have 22 templates of policies. And let's say that sometimes I saw organizations just taking the template, the Word document template, not changing a thing, not changing a line. And of course, what happens that if it's your remote working policy that you just took a random template from the internet. Like, even if the template is of good quality, if it doesn't match the fact that your employees work like 3 days home and like 2 days at the office, if
Mhm.
it doesn't take into account the actual setup, the actual parameters of your organization, and that employee sees, okay, it's obviously a template that has nothing to do with what we experience on a daily basis. I'm just gonna go towards the end of document and click sign
Mhm.
and like just move on to the next thing, right? So I would like to let's say play the devil's advocate. I think that most of the time employees are right to ignore the policies because honestly the policies they are seeing just no effort has been put into making them relevant, right? It's just
Mhm.
and when a
Yeah.
template has been bought like you can be lucky if the template has been bought, it was a consistent set of templates. But I can tell you sometimes I saw like templates just downloaded from the internet in a context that had nothing to do with the actual company where it needs to be implemented.
Yeah.
Like template for a university used for a startup, and you're like, do you expect employees to read that? Of course not. Of course they won't do this. So yeah, adapting like to the context of the organization is key, and this is
Mhm.
one tiny reason that might increase the chance of having policies that are read by employees. It's not the only one I can expand, but yeah. What do you think of that?
I love the examples. Just downloading a template and expecting, people to read it afterwards. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because when you truly want to embed a certain policy into your company, you have to do the work, you have to do the homework, you have to implement everything the right way it's supposed to be. But when you're in a position that is kind of lazy and you don't want to drag and you don't want to rush, you're thinking, oh, I'm not going to overload my sensory system with all of this. I'm not going to read like 30 pages of documentation that is not going to get me anywhere. Everything will probably be fine
Yeah,
anyways. So yeah, you just, as you said, great example. You download a template that was made for a university, and then you put that into a startup, and you expect everyone to just read it and be okay with it. But yeah, great example made there. However, I do think that in terms of implementation, as you mentioned, there should be training regiments for these cybersecurity policies that are put in place, and I think that makes perfect sense. But with that being said, now it's time to move on to our next topic that I wanted to discuss,
yeah.
and that is of course risk management in the digital age, and some of the lessons that we can learn from the high risk environments such as the cyber security policies. So I want to show that, well, to all of our viewers, I want to show that the technical risk controls alone, they're not enough. And human behavior kind of undermines them because organizations, as we mentioned previously, spend significant time. Well, actually, we didn't mention this previously. We will mention it, of course. So organizations spend significant time developing KRIs and these formal risk assessments, but despite all of the structure, one careless click, one unauthorized access, it can throw everything off. And I guess a good example here would be what happened to SolarWinds case, because it was not really a technical failure. It was just the people and the processes that were in the company. And so I want to ask you a question of how employee decisions and oversights weaken risk frameworks, even when, for instance, KRIs are put in place.
Yeah. So actually, this is related to another piece of answer of the previous question. Is that
Mhm.
often people in charge of compliance with information
Mhm.
security compliance, risk management, think that it's enough to do a thing, to
Mhm.
put something in place, and they think that it will all go all right by itself. So an example, you publish a policy and you expect people to read it and to understand it and to implement
Mhm.
it. Or you set up an indicator and you expect people to collect it, care about it, and report it. And that's actually I think it's a failing mindset and it's a recipe for failure. So before we were on the policies, so in the example of a policy that you write, what you do is that you not only design your remote working policy where you explain inside plainly what to do with the Wi-Fi, with the VPN, or even more interesting today, the use of AI. So no, an AI security
Oh.
policy where you explain whether people can use ChatGPT, so you are concrete, etc. But then what you
Mhm.
do is that you not only publish the policy, you also share summaries or extracts where you explain to people, okay, this is the no, like too long didn't read. This is the like 5 bullet points you have to know about this policy. You do communication
Yeah.
efforts, and this brings me to the answer to this same question: is that often employee decisions and oversight, they can weaken the risk framework because we thought that the employees like were knowledgeable, but actually we didn't help them being knowledgeable. And yet sometimes they can be bad faith. They can be an employee that actually he's aware of everything and still will do the wrong thing. This can happen. I'm not saying I'm
Mhm.
not naive, but I'm saying often I think that if you're the compliance manager somehow and you think it's the everybody should get everything right from the first minute you implement the compliance measure, you mistook the part. That's big piece of your
Mhm.
job is pedagogy and like teaching, and trust me, yeah, like just passing on information that for you is obvious, but that isn't for the rest of people because they are busy. You have Karais, a good example with talking password, your password company. So I worked for companies that had password managers, and we were
Mhm.
monitoring the use of password managers. And you know what? Sometimes we discovered that we were not enough looking into how people were using the password managers. Well, if there was skipping, if the
Mhm.
numbers were okay, this employee doesn't even use password managers. That do we understand why? Is it because they don't want to? Is it because they never use the internet? And I think understanding better the context of the people to which you ask to do something is always better, because then you are able to maybe adjust the risk framework as well. Maybe
Mhm.
some indicators don't make fully sense. So and of course, sometimes yes, sometimes people don't do the right thing even though they have been educated. But by default, I think there's a lack of education.
Wow, that was actually a pitch perfect answer that I expected from you because again, I was thinking the same thing. The lack of education is present mostly in all the things that that I'm a part of. For instance, even when you're like, I guess a good example was with password managers. I will bring that up in our next segment when we will be discussing password
Yes.
managers in more detail. But again, when we're talking about the lack of education, a lot of people are prone to, falling for phishing attacks, and phishing attacks have been present at all times. And if we look at the the demographic for the people that actually fall for it, it's usually the older people that don't have the necessary knowledge about clicking the wrong thing, because again, the bad actors just compile a perfect copy of a website that you use, or for instance your banking app, and a lot of people are actually prone to losing their assets because of it. And again, when we're talking about the implementation of you know cybersecurity policies, that's just another step up, because again, you're not just using everything that you would use on your own, just personal stuff. You're actually on the corporate side of things. You're managing, for instance, the finances of a 150 employee company, and you need to go that extra mile. You need to learn. You need to actually adapt and get to um, just to have know-how of how things work. But that actually perfectly takes us to the next question in our segment, which is, of course, third-party risks. And again, the third-party risk is, of course, a growing attack vector, as I mentioned, and companies are often the companies are often blind to it until it's kind of too late, because you never expect that things can go wrong until they go wrong. And so, for instance, I've read some info about it, and I learned that more than 60% of the data breaches in 2024
Mm.
were linked to third parties, so third-party applications that you were using. And it especially happens with vendors with like weak security, and uh, the Move IT or the Move It, I think, I'm not sure exactly. So the Move IT breach alone in a previous year affected over like 2,500 organizations, if I'm remembering correctly, because I was reading about it not so long ago. Yeah, again, yet many of the businesses still don't do this ongoing due diligence beyond just an initial onboarding questionnaire, as we mentioned previously in some of our questions. And so, with the third party risks being a growing concern, especially with supply chain attacks, for instance, that they're on the rise, what best practices should businesses adopt to mitigate the risks from external suppliers and partners?
That's probably the most tricky question in the whole information security compliance domain.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm gonna give a reply, but you have to think that there are organizations that are so different from each other. I've worked in the payment
Yeah,
banking
sure.
industry. Outsourcing policy would be 132 pages long. Just one of the like 10 to 15 policies you for one
Jeez.
sub entity of the big group. Of course, you don't manage the same way in a one person startup or even 200 person
Mhm.
startup. The answer is that it depends, but then what concretely you can do so is again, so we are used to shortcuts. The truth is that any organization I've seen that was managing a third-party risk well had someone in charge. It can be the
Mhm.
information security person. It can be sometimes roles that are mixed, right, in compliance. But it must be someone that understands the risks and is able to communicate with the vendor, so be it at the initial
Yes.
phases where we will actually so doing a contextualized analysis, because not all vendors carry the same risks. I like this. So there's the new regulation in European Union. I mean, new now, it's not that new anymore, but it's called DORA. So it's about
Oh.
resilience, and it has a big focus on third parties. And so what does this regulation ask companies to do? So in the financial industry, it asks evaluate the concentration risks. That's very interesting. So um, is like, okay, our platform is only relying on AWS. So what are we doing about it? How bad is this? Like understanding who are the critical ICT third parties you rely on, and implementing controls. So do we have an alternative provider that we can rely on in case there is any disruption? So this is, for example, an example of not only due diligence at the beginning, but also along the life cycle of having a vendor, making sure that for any critical vendor you rely on, you have somehow a backup in case things go south. And this is an alternative. Even small organizations can apply. I mean, I run a SaaS. I have a very small team, basically me and contractors occasionally, and
Mhm.
so what we do is that I have, so the most critical part of my business have one main provider, but then at least one or even sometimes two alternative providers that I can
Mhm.
one click deploy in case there is a big disruption. I think this is important. Then does it mitigate all security breaches? No. So this is why for example, even a small organization, I do careful review of who I work with, what are the companies I end up choosing to pass my data. Do they care about data
Mhm.
protection? Do they show concrete signs beyond nice policies? If we have the occasion to jump on call together, which I now do, I don't like much calls, but sometimes when you have a call with the provider, you understand where they come from and you understand if they are serious about that, and you can ask for
Mhm.
follow-up evidence that they do what they say they're doing. Then it's a relationship. I think we treat vendors as a very transactional thing, but the companies I work now the closest with, actually I know them, I know who they are. And then with this relationship, I can ask the life cycle of the relationship. I can ask, okay, did you implement this? I ask you to implement this data retention thing. Where is it, right?
Mhm.
I will write some policies for my vendors. So I think this relationship, having someone being able to do this work is important.
You're absolutely right. And I love your approach because, again, you're going into any country that you're trying to set up with your company with a clear-headed intelligence. You're thinking about, you're giving yourself room for mistakes and errors that can occur, and you always have backup plan to go for it. And I think that should be the best approach for going for third-party softwares and the SAS projects or implementations that you're willing to look for in a company. But that, yeah, that does make actually perfect sense, and I think I don't have much to add to it, other than the fact that what we have mentioned previously before all of this, the fact that due diligence is a must, it's a mandatory thing, and doing research and preparing well and giving yourself that room for a mistake, and I think that should be the best policy to abide by. And of course, that policy should be applied to your employees too, because again, if you don't lead by an example, who's going to follow? That made
So,
perfect sense. I think we can start our next segment actually, which is going to be talking about the hidden risks of password management, mismanagement. And yeah, we have previously mentioned this on our like second question, I think. But yeah, it's time to move on to the next topic and look at some of the lessons from the real world breaches that we can, for instance, mention here. When we're talking about password mismanagement, even mature security programs often fail at the basics because a password is a password and you only need the password to get into the system. No matter how complex your security system might be, if someone gets hold of the password in some kind of way, then you can say that it's essentially over unless you have security measures put in place that go beyond just a password breach like that. What I can mention here is Verizon's DBIR that consistently shows over 80% of hacking related breaches actually involve stolen or reused credentials. So, like stolen passwords, for example, maybe there was a phishing attack and you type in your password in the wrong website, and then it just show you that, oh, it was like a network mistake. And then you go back and click on a bookmark that you saved, and then it worked, but you might not even realize that your password has been stolen at that time. And so, Passwork, for instance, a self-hosted password manager, a lot of other companies, a lot of our clients, they do have password policies put in place. But then again, for some companies, there's clearly something not working. I'm not talking about our clients here per se, but when we're looking at the broader picture, again, some things go wrong. And if they're not, for instance, using a password manager, it was saved in a messenger somewhere, it was like saved on a Google Doc somewhere, for instance, the attackers are still able to get through to that info. And it's not even going to be a hack, it's just going to be them walking through the front door. And so I want to ask you a question of about password mismanagement because despite strong policies, password related breaches, they still remain like one of the biggest threats. And what are the most common mistakes organizations make in managing credentials and how can they be avoided? Apart from not using
yeah,
a password manager, of
yeah.
course. Shout out to Passwork.
Yes. Exactly. Do you know the concept of anti-fragile?
The anti what?
Anti-fragile.
Oh yeah, I heard about it. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So it's like this. My favorite author, Nassim Taleb, ex-trader, that became philosopher of risk, has this concept very interesting. So of the anti-fragile things, so meaning that if you know, like you have this teacup and just it falls on the ground, and of course it breaks.
Mhm.
Some things in the world, you actually when they fall, they become stronger. I'm a big fan of anti-fragility, and I think you can find it in organizations as well. And what would be the application of this idea to actually password management is that you don't rely on the fact that the password is unbreachable. Of course, you will do your best here, and we can discuss what's the best here, but
Mhm.
make sure that even if the password was breached, there wouldn't be any impact. And how do you do this? This go back to basic. It's called MFA, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that you have multi-factor authentication everywhere that matters. I think it's already a great progress. I think every company should have a clear idea of what are the software, the vendors they rely on, and the staff is relying on to do the work, and implement MFA here where it makes sense, in the combination of all the best password practice, so having a unique password for each
Mhm.
website, and you do this by having the password manager generating these passwords for you, so that you don't even have to remember them or craft relevant passwords that we're not good at this at all. And by the way, like a big a big problem that used to be called as a best practice is this password rotation.
Mhm.
Password rotation you used to be recommended in the past, but I think recently NIST uh, explained that it's actually we can in some countries weaken cybersecurity, and why, and it makes sense. It's why, because employees, what they will do is actually they will draft an algorithm where they can change a letter to the password they already know, and they will have this
Mhm.
rotation of the same password, just one letter changing every time. And this actually
Yeah.
weaker than just random password changing drafted by the password manager. So yeah, defense in depth. I think Ivan in the comments had the right word. That's exactly this, and I think this is still valid all the way.
That actually kind of answers the next question that I had, because the next question is about the best use cases for a password manager and how you know if its use is even effective. But I think that makes perfect sense because, again, you're putting in place these pillows. The anti-fragility example there is actually really good too. And when you're talking about doing the password rotations, when you're talking about using passwords, don't even get me started on the matter of storing your passwords somewhere, because, again, you might store them on a messenger. Don't ever do that. In crypto, for instance, if you know about it, and if our viewers know about it, you have your non-custodial wallet, for instance, and it has like a seed phrase consisting of 12 words, and that is kind of the password for your crypto wallet. And it's a mandatory thing for you to actually write it down on paper somewhere and store it safely, in a safe, or, for instance, in a book that no one will ever open, just somewhere that where it is safe. And yeah, it just makes a great example here too. And again, I would just want to ask you this next question that we have, again, talking about what's the best use cases of a password manager, and how do you know its use is even effective? What would you say to that, Tristan?
Yeah, I like the example of sharing secrets.
Oh,
You have a temporary code or password to share with third party.
yes.
Doesn't even sometimes belong to the organization. I like that. I think it's a clean way to share these credentials securely. So this one of the use cases I like the most probably because just you share it and forget it. It will be deleted automatically in 3 days. So I like not piling up things that become risks, and it just makes things easier to manage. And now,
Mhm.
how do you know password management is effective? So here it's what I mentioned before, anti-fragility. It's like you don't pray to hope it's not happening. You want to know if actually people breach the security measures
Mhm.
you put in place. And here I had an organization where I was the admin of a data leakage prevention tool. So we were actually
Oh.
having we implemented rules where we were making sure that we would see if people were sharing password in Google Docs. When you do that,
Mhm.
okay, have the password manager in place. We hope it works, but at the same time, we have to be ready and we have to be
Mhm.
prepared to the idea that it's actually not working, that people are bypassing it because they don't want to do the 2FA to enter in the password manager
Yes.
because I mean sometimes it's really about this. It's really about convenience, practicality, um, and we know so you have to be ready to identify people who are not doing it, and so once you can identify them, you can have a talk with them, understand better the context. Maybe sometimes it's badly set up, it doesn't work. So this is why I was saying it's important that compliance managers try to use empathy to understand their users. And yes, sometimes we have bad faith people that don't want to do it because they are lazy or whatever. But sometimes maybe there's actually a relevant reason why they are not doing it. so
Mhm.
so you have to investigate a bit and not assume that people are evil by default. Sometimes you badly set up your security control and you need to check it.
Yeah.
So
Couldn't have put it better myself. And if anyone watching is interested in a password manager, you can click the QR code on the webinar here and get a free demo of Passwork, which is a self-hosted password manager. There's also a cloud version available if you have a small team. And yeah, let's keep it going. That was actually a great continuation to the next topic that we're going to be talking about, which also has to do with automating governance and risk compliance, GRC, and of course the overall future of security management. So what I would like to explore with this topic is the real world friction in replacing the manual processes, as we mentioned, with automation, especially during scaling, because you have growth in your companies. A lot of people are coming in, a lot of people are getting out. You have to cover the bandages, the wounds, and the risks that might come from it. And of course, manual compliance reporting, for instance, is like a time sink, as a lot of people say. And research from the Forrester, actually, that I read, shows that automation can cut the GRC workload by up to like 60%. But I've also heard some like horror stories of automation projects failing again due to the poor change management, poor due diligence, and so clearly there's also nuance there. And the next question that we want to explore here: why are so manual compliance processes slow businesses down as usual, yet many hesitate to automate? And we want to know what the biggest pitfalls companies face when transitioning to automated GRC solutions are, for instance. Let's hear that.
Yeah, okay, you're getting me started on something. I think if there
I
is
know,
something
I know.
LinkedIn community and compliance is that makes a lot of people write many things. This is exactly this topic. So here something really important is that manual is not always bad, and automation is double-edged sword. So now, why is manual not always a bad thing? Is that in the end, when you do things manually, you have some skin in the game. What I mean by this is that if you take actually 2 hours to sit down and work on something, you have an interest in making sure that what you do makes sense.
Mhm.
For example, reporting indicators. I started my career in GRC reporting like 35 indicators, chasing them in sub-entities all around the world of a bank. So, and I was the one consolidating these indicators, and I can tell you that when you're in this position, you chase people. Yeah, chase. I mean, you write to people and you contact them, and you have to take care of the definitions. So, vulnerability management, is it measured within 90 days, or all of these details? What you care about is making sure that it makes sense. So what happens here is that now when you automate, sometimes you lose a bit this dimension of like, just does it make sense what I'm doing? So what happens is that
Mhm.
sometimes you become overly ambitious, and you actually, you set the stage for planning more work than actually capacity to do. And I think that sometimes when you do things manually, you take decisions and you say, no, we aren't going to measure this indicator. Now, for example, we won't have 5 indicators related to passwords, just one, because
Mhm.
the one we're choosing to keep just is consistent, is related to the risk that we rated as the most relevant to the organization when it comes to passwords. While
Mhm.
sometimes if you go for a platform and you say, okay, we're gonna delegate, we're gonna remove this task off the shelf, we don't have an interest to look at this anymore. So this is a big piece of that's a big idea here. Now, with automation, so the second part of the question, right? Pitfalls when you transition to automated GRC solutions. So, I mean, I think that the biggest pitfall I've seen is the expectation that, oh, I mean, that's fully automated. So, which is a bit the responsibility of these platforms that I think
Mhm.
they base their marketing on selling full automation. Most of the times, like
Yeah.
60 or 80%, but it's not 100%. So wrong
Mhm.
expectations from companies that have not must make investors happy. So
Yeah.
I think that's a bit of the problem. Then I mean, structural. There's not much we can do about it. But that
Mhm.
said, better expectations as well. I think as a company that is looking for GRC solution, you must be ready to still have to do the work. Any
Mhm.
tooling, any template, any software, any consultant that you bring in can bring some extra brain juice, extra resource, extra capacity. But
Mhm.
I think that on a bank or startup or any organization that is using this kind of software, they have to still have this person that is the project manager and that has skin
Yes.
in the game and has an interest in making this thing work. Because if you outsource this responsibility, then things go south because nobody is in charge, and the vendor doesn't have this same interest to make sure that
Mhm.
in your organization goes well. So still become the owner of the process, and that's a big part of the deal.
That actually reminds me of a very interesting example that I want to bring here. I think a lot of us have seen Willy Wonka, the new movie with Johnny Depp, the one that's fresh. And then the father of the main character there, his job was screwing on the lids of the toothpaste. And he essentially lost his job to a machine that did that instead of him. So the company kind of automated that process. But then in the end, it turns out that he actually became the engineer to fix that machine or to watch that machine and make sure it
Mm.
runs perfectly. And so, yeah, that actually perfectly encapsulates the example that you made there, because again, there cannot be full automation with and yeah, when you're doing the marketing and when you're trying to please your investors, you're saying, oh, it can do this, it can do that, and maybe you sometimes overpromise, but still you need a person to fix that machine that puts the tubes puts the lids on the toothpaste brushes, not brushes, but toothpaste itself. And actually, that brings me to my next question I want to ask you, also a topic of automation. It is this question, because what I'm going to try to do here is I'm going to try to, with your help, address
Yeah.
the like, or I guess like connect the idea of automation with behavioral change, because again, things are
Yeah.
changing, new technology is coming up, and it's not just about operational efficiency. Because when people are bombarded with policy updates and security reminders, as we mentioned previously, they start tuning them out. And I do have to admit, I'm also the victim of that, because again, you might just not be able to handle all that workload, and having to read 100 pages of policies might just be not enough for you. And so security fatigue, something that I came up with here, it's kind of real, especially in if I would make an example here, it would be especially real in hybrid work uh, environments, because some people you have in the office, some people you have at home. And so I'm wondering, can the right automation kind of help lighten that cognitive load? And so, yeah, the question is, can automation actually reduce human errors and policy fatigue that lead employees to ignore the security rules?
I so I didn't see Willy Wonka, but I'm still gonna
Oh, really?
try to answer. Uh, yeah, the new one.
You have
Um,
to watch that
but
movie. It's amazing.
I would give it a try. But before your automation, so
Yeah, of course.
actually, I think that there's a risk that automation makes it worse. This connects me to the
Hmm.
previous point I made. There's nothing automatic in rolling out such tool. So I mean,
Mhm,
don't have to name it, but you type any kind of big jersey tool, compliance platform that is supposed to automate ISO 27001, SOC 2, or
mhm,
any other framework or risk management. Any of these tools, they have modules, they have processes embedded in the tool. And of course, they can be customized, especially if you're an enterprise customer. But
mhm,
this is a project. It's a project, so you or your organization must have requirements. And I've been actually once when working for a bank, I worked for this for ServiceNow, implementing this big. Very complex tool. So this is a project. It takes like 2 years to roll out.
mhm,
And so what you need to do is to identify all the risk management works inside your company, the incident management framework, and making sure that the modules you are designing are actually helping and not creating a mess inside the organization, not designing for failure. No, because if you design something that has 10 more steps than the Excel process, like people are gonna stick to Excel. And actually,
mhm,
I can tell you, once I arrived in an organization and they were telling me we're using this tool for ISO 2701. Doing one
mhm,
single action in this tool was taking like 10 times more than using Excel. So I said, hey, I don't know what's the deal with this tool, like the contract we signed or how much it costs or whatever, but like if you want to progress on ISO, just stop this tool. Like we're losing
mhm,
our time here. And we went back to Excel. And we went very far with Excel, and we got certified. But like sometimes these tools they're not designed to help. And I love Compass platforms. I work with great partners, and some they're very impressive. They can be very impressive, but the things that it has to match your context, your requirements, the way you work, and there's nothing automatic in that. So this is why you must
mhm,
remain the brain. So concretely have a project manager, somebody in charge, embodies the organization, just talk with the vendor, make sure it's okay, make sure it's a fit. And this is the part that cannot be skipped and cannot be automatized. And then yeah, you can try, you can have a pilot, you can, or maybe you can be ready to go on, because sometimes these tools are very efficient. But yeah, like sometimes it's always about this hack mentality. I'm gonna automate everything. I'm gonna externalize everything. No. Like yeah, you can, but like it's still your responsibility to make sure you're taking decisions that make sense. And implementing a tool is a big decision. So policy fatigue. Imagine if you don't design this implementation well, what happens is that I already saw a risk module where like the CEO had of a big company, like I cannot mention the size, but imagine it's very big, very, very international. Like the CEO had to enter in the tool, passing through so many layers and to click on a risk acceptance form for even minor risks. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. You think your CEO power horse is best used by like clicking on 80 times, like several times a week, for accepting a risk acceptance form that they're not even gonna read? Like this is not progress. This is alienation. And so definitely have a project manager that's use their brain. You can use AI, use a lot of AI, but sometimes use your brain, and this is where you use your brain. Otherwise, you turn
Absolutely.
into policy fatigue.
I mean, I fully agree. I fully agree. And I think when we're collecting everything that we have mentioned so far, another thing that we can add, and of course, with the beautiful answers to that question, is the fact that the user experience also has to be there because, again, to kind of evade that fatigue and to kind of make sure everything goes seamlessly, again, with the example with the using Excel instead of the other solution, it has to be easy to use and it has to be easy to
Mhm.
understand. For instance, with people that are going in, because something that I noticed, for instance, when we're doing our jobs, when we're trying to start new processes, um, a lot of tools come in, and a lot of projects are making this and that tool. For instance, I saw an ad yesterday for an AI calendar manager that essentially collects all your tasks from your Google Calendar, collects all your calls, and assigns like a certain amount of time for them.
Yeah.
It thinks how much time it, for instance, would take, for instance, to create a banner or to compile like a draft of an article that you want to write. And imagine using that with all of the other billion tools that you already use. Your head could just explode because of it. Yeah. But all in all, that was a
Yeah.
perfect example and a perfect encapsulation of the question there. But moving on to our last segment, it is actually going to be, I think, the most important question to discuss and the most important topic to discuss, which is cybersecurity leadership. And as you and I have mentioned previously, if you're not leading by example, then you can expect less than significantly good results. And so, yeah, we're going to explore cybersecurity leadership, and answer the question of how to build like a secured first mindset in your organization for everyone that's watching. And I think Tristan is going to do a beautiful job of that. But if we want to start with a question, I would like to address the communication gap that, for instance, can or may happen, or maybe is actually happening right now with the CISOs and the business leadership, because some of the decisions might not align necessarily. And there's often a disconnect between the security leaders and the C-suite. And a recent PwC survey that I read showed that while 80% of all the execs said they prioritize cybersecurity, only 30% of the CISOs felt adequately supported by that leadership. And that's like a very serious misalignment when you really think of it, because again, you go on an interview with the founder and he's going to say, oh, I got security first always, but then his CISO comes and says, oh, not really. And you don't want to be in that situation. So um, this brings me to a question. Security is often seen as an IT problem rather than a company-wide priority, which it should actually be. So, how can security leaders effectively communicate its importance to the executives and gain their full support? because again, the executives might just be wondering about how to make a buck and not thinking about security.
So just a small disclaimer here. I'm not a CISO. I think it's a very
Mhm.
hard job. I've worked with plenty of them. I mean, I'm an information security manager, but I've always
Mhm.
been like the consultant. I prefer the consultant role, and I think CISO is extremely tough job, and not especially tailored for me. But I've worked with them a lot, especially supporting on the compliance side. And what I can see is that maybe sometimes a pitfall from security leaders to use too much the technical language. And I mean, this is what we mentioned at the beginning of the call. It's like not using empathy enough to try to understand who you're
Mhm.
talking to. But at this point, like a CISO it's a political role. You can talk vulnerability management with the IT security engineer or any person in IT taking care of that, but you cannot talk the same way about vulnerability management to the leadership of the company. So you have to talk money, not always putting, I mean, figures to a risk and also the mitigation costs of this risk.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I mean, just you won't have receptive people in front of you. And I mean, there's a concrete example these days. Let's say AI security. Like we talk about that everywhere. Like now, it's everybody's talking about AI, the risk of AI, risk of AI. But if you actually enter a meeting room, in a risk committee or any room with senior management, they they will ask you, but what's the actual risk of AI for my organization? And and what is obvious for CISO isn't for them, isn't for the CEO of a
Mhm.
company. Um, it might be abstract in intellectual property or they need to understand they don't necessarily know, okay, yeah, my business secrets can be used to train a model and then they can be retrieved by someone else. You have to use, this is the job of the security leader, to use the words that are best, can be best understood by the management. And this is most of the time this means going less on the technical side and just figuring out
Mhm.
whose person are you have in front of you and adapting to them. And it's an adaptation job.
That would speak, that would be like the perfect language to relay to me if I was a founder and if I was, unaware or inattentive to some of the threats that might be looming over my company. And if I were to converse with the CISO and that CISO would not come to me with the technicality of all these things, with like a 50-page document showing that this and that can happen, but just relaying to me the information on an empathy level that, this is a thing that might happen and it's a risk that we want to close. The less risks we have, the more safe we will be. So yeah, take this into consideration. Make sure you do the homework, read about it, know what this is for, and know what it defends us from. And then you can think about implementing this and that security solution into your company. And that would be a done deal for me, I would say. Oh, that actually perfectly makes sense. And now that we have discussed the C-suite, we now have to actually look at some of the human side too, because when we want to uncover.
So yes, sorry, I think I'm losing you a bit. I don't hear you very well. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I don't know which side, but that's okay. Let,
Oh,
let's hope it's gonna be fixed.
yeah, hopefully you can hear me now.
Okay,
And as
okay, it's fixed. Okay.
okay, that's perfect. Yeah, and so I was talking about uncovering the cultural and educational strategies that actually shift the employees' behavior long term, so that they use the policies, so that they put in place habits that make them safer overall and don't ignore the cybersecurity policies. And as I mentioned before you lost me, there's a lot of security training, and you see it always, but by some of these surveys that I read, actually less than half of the employees usually say they feel like confident identifying, for instance, like a phishing mail,
Mm.
um, or like any other thing that they might be prone to. So it's not just about training, but it's actually just about like changing the mindset and the default behavior and fostering these habits. But what would you say? So human error remains like one of the top security risks, of course. And what strategies have proven most effective in building a security first mindset across, like all levels of organization, not just the C-suite?
I mean, I would be very humble with that. I think it's very hard to make an impact. And again, I have an immense
Mhm.
respect for CISOs because I think their job is really tough. Now, from a compliance perspective and from the now ISO 27 project guy that was in charge of making ISO happen, what I've seen a lot is in the end, I mean, honestly, give a look at like the average information security awareness training
Mhm.
you went through. I mean, I went through plenty of them over the past 5 years, and I can tell you that it was hard to find
Mhm.
something that was tailored to be interesting, to raise, not catch your attention, and just to make it. I mean, yeah, to pass the best practice, but also just to have a video that you don't want to just skip because
Yeah.
it's very boring, and most of trainings fail completely to that. Like the last one I saw wasn't security, but it was office security, physical security. And this one was like, it was talking to us as if we were like 5 years old kids. And like the training was lasting like 1 hour and a
Mm.
half or almost 2 hours of modules of things that you honestly you learned when you were 5 years old person. So
Yeah.
of course, if the average training you have to go through is like this, you only want to know where is the exit, where oh you can skip it. And I actually know I've already seen people passing themselves between each other the answers to some quizzes so that they could skip faster the training.
Yeah.
And it is to say that oftentimes, like the providers organizations pick up random providers just to tick off the box, and sometimes not interesting enough so that people actually care and watch the videos and just learn. So
Mhm.
here what can be changed is that sometimes, and actually it's funny because it's an entrepreneurship principle, but doing
Mhm.
things that don't scale, sometimes the best security training you can give, and I've given a lot of them on vendor management, on GDPR, data protection. It was sitting in a room
Mhm.
with like 3 people, 5 people, 10 people, and telling them what they needed to hear contextualized to their job. So
Oh.
I sat down with data engineers, explaining them. So 2 years ago now, when ChatGPT came up, explaining them, okay, that's the impact of treating this kind of PII with LLM. So this you can do, this you can't, and this is not the same thing that you would tell to a finance person or an HR person. So it was actually going in the organizations, sitting a lot of different people and telling them what they needed to hear based on their context. So one of your answers you're looking for is doing things that don't scale. And again, for this you need people, you need investment, commitment. So you cannot outsource all of this to AI. And I'm a big fan of AI. It helps me tremendously, but it's exactly the part that cannot be too much change with AI, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't ask ChatGPT to learn all of these cybersecurity policies for you,
Oh no,
unfortunately.
no, oh no, this you can.
Yeah. Go.
But yeah, yeah, but yeah, then to actually practice it, yeah, Yusuf, you have to be the person. Before you use operators and just AIs that replace you
Mhm.
completely. Yeah, you have to do the job. But this is where security or compliance leadership has to sometimes invest in time that isn't the most effective, the most efficient, and just sit down
Mhm.
with few people and explaining them better.
I think that is the perfect ending for the question of, or I guess like the topic of cybersecurity leadership, is to actually have a human conversation, to converse the truth, to converse the, how would I say it, foster an egg, like a chicken hatching an egg. You kind of have to do the same kind of job with your employees, foster for them,
Yeah.
care for them, and make sure they learn, make sure they're a part of the something that's bigger. But I think all in all,
Mhm.
when we're talking about the topic of why people ignore cybersecurity policies, we have actually managed to do a very good job. And I thank you, Tristan, for that, for giving all these perfect answers and in my opinion, perfect answers to all these questions. Because again, when I was compiling these questions, when I was thinking about these topics, I kind of already had an understanding of what the answers to those questions would be, but I did not expect to have such an open-minded conversation and to have my expectations blown out of the water with the examples that you made. And I have to say a big thank you for that, for doing all that research and for, of course, coming for the for the webinar too. But yeah, all in all, again, thanks a lot, Tristan. We're gonna
Thanks for
wrap this up. We're gonna wrap this up. I'm gonna give you a chance to say your CTA, but before that, I will do mine. And so, yeah, for everyone that has joined the webinar, if you found it interesting, stay tuned for more. As I said, Passwork is going to be home for all things cybersecurity very soon, and we're going to open a lot more webinars that people will be able to join. We're going to have more engaging discussions, such as the one that we had with Tris today. And yeah, if you're interested in Passwork as a product, make sure to scan that QR code. There's a free demo waiting for you there. And yeah, again, Tristan, thank you very much. Your last words.
Yeah, thank you so much for the conversation. I think that was, I mean, something that made me laugh, and I think it's the worst nightmare I can imagine is the AI calendar manager or something.
Yeah.
I think it's a big echo to this conversation. We always
Yes.
think about adding more stuff, adding more tools, adding. I don't think about sometimes making better decision is helpful. In this case, maybe you should just have less events in your calendar, saying no to more meetings. And in this case,
Yeah.
maybe you wouldn't need this product. I think it's the same with compliance policies. You can use tools, you can use templates to make your work more effective, but always remain the captain on the boat and make sure that you take
Yeah.
decisions that make sense to your context. And when you do this, you can adopt any platform tool or AI assistant like ISMS Copilot, but only after you make sure this is what you need at the given point. And yeah, and then you won't be disappointed. And that was my CTA. Nothing much more to say, but thank you so much for the conversation. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Tristan. It was a pleasure. And you made a great example again. You're making great examples this whole webinar, Tristan. Be the captain of your boat, stay safe, stay secure, don't overcomplicate things, and maybe, just maybe, that'll be the perfect recipe for, you know, having the least risk possible in your organization. But yeah, if you enjoyed the webinar, make sure to share it. It'll also be available on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn if you missed some of the parts of it. So make sure to go back and watch it again. And yeah, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you again, Tristan, and thank you all our dear viewers for joining us today. We hope to see you again, and that's going to be a wrap. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye.